Today I'm talking about my film made in 1984 about Margaret Atwood, called Once in August. This is a very problematic film in the most interesting of ways. Initially, I was so pleased with myself because I wrote her this cheeky letter in which I proposed that if she gave me access to herself for an intimate portrait, an observational portrait, that she'd be able to say no to anybody else for the next 25 years. It worked. She said yes. And so I set the scene as to her importance.
She has written 5 novels, 10 books of poetry, 2 of criticism, and 3 of short stories. There are 3 million copies of her works in print. She's published in 17 countries. She's a formidable person. People become very excited or nervous in her presence.
So I was feeling quite clever that not only was I getting access to her exclusively for 5 days, but to her private island and to her family.
We were to spend 5 days in August with her on the family island. Her family's been coming to this remote spot since she was a baby. Here she is doing the same trip with her mother and her brother Harold. And here she's with her dad, the zoologist. He's an insect expert, and this region used to be his base.
Truth to tell, I had Merrily Wiseboard, my colleague, to thank for having the parents there. They had decided to flee the filming, but Merrily convinced them to stay. And it was incredibly important in the film, as it turned out.
Years later, when the little girl became a writer, this was the setting of one of her best novels, Surfacing. It tells the story of a young woman who comes back to the family island to find her missing father. He may be drowned or mad in the bush.
So I was thinking of all this richness ahead, and I was not really thinking about how I would comport myself once we got access to this castle, which was Margaret Atwood across the moat. I guess if there's a lesson to learn here, and this is a teaching tool, it's that sometimes it's better not to be part of the story.
You're very tucked away.
I think now that I would have been much better off not doing a cinema verite film, cinema truth, as they say, but doing a more of an essay film where I had pundits behind whom I could shelter. And I say that because when you make a verite film, you're plunging into the river of life, as it were. You've got your camera over your head and you're going with the flow. But if that river has strange rapids and waterfalls that you know nothing about, you're going to drown.
Now, you want to know how to
What should we do?
comport yourselves. Well, the main thing is not to leave anything around that might attract bears, and that means that you burn any meat-type garbage or anything cooked.
Okay, we'll do that.
Now, we shouldn't have any real problem with bears here because it's an island, and they very seldom come here, but I wouldn't want to feel that you'd
Brought the
been
first bear.
gobbled up on my account.
Okay, we can do all that. Thank you.
I look at the film now and I see that I've turned my eyes away, as if I've been dismissed by the den mother, the mother of the bear. And soon I find myself quoting lines which show my disease, my anxiety. There's her father showing Jess, the daughter, plants, and he's talking about hemlock.
It's very deadly.
If you eat it?
If you eat it, yes. This is the stuff, by the way, that Socrates drank, the Greek who was forced to commit suicide. Poison hemlock.
And then I quote this line.
In the prose poem, she says, people like to make poison. If you don't understand that, you'll never understand anything.
Barometer's fallen. Bad.
And I'm thinking that when she was a kid, She loved to scare her friends. She was a scary person.
In the prose poem, she says, "It's time to like men again. Where shall we begin?"
Will I be on the likeable list? I'm not sure. I realise that I've come to the island with an agenda. Didn't know I had it, actually. And it may not be that popular.
Peggy, would you mind autographing these books for me?
Not at all.
It's very kind of you. Is there any pleasure in having written them all?
Oh, lots, yeah.
Marilee has no such problem. She's a feminist writer, and they sit down for a cozy chat together while I'm out in the rain, and I'm worried about the noise of the drops on the soundtrack.
What did you deal with when you first started writing poetry as a woman? What were you having to deal with?
Well, I'll just change it around a little bit and say that when I first started writing poetry, it was focused very much on what would be called personal relationships, which in my case means largely relationships with men. And I think one of the difficulties for women who have come from families in which the men are not exactly lacking in confidence, such as mine, is the realization that some men are frightened. You know, that some men are very vulnerable and anxious about things, and you usually can't see why. You know, especially if they happen to be anxious about you. You can't see why they should be so anxious and shaky.
I guess I was coming across as somewhat shaky, and that may have been guilt, feeling that I was part of the patriarchy, part of the system that was locking women up at home and not letting them get out into the world to be famous writers. And then I get to talk to her in more depth, and she's very forthcoming.
And I thought,
No,
well, maybe you want to talk about
I
it.
don't talk about things that I'm going to do, that I'm planning. I will talk about things that I have done.
You were saying that the first draft of Surfacing was a disaster.
It was pretty bad, yeah.
Why?
It had no, well, let's see, I wrote an unpublished novel first. That was in 1963. Then I wrote Edible Woman. Oh, the unpublished novel was never published because it was considered very gloomy. It was very gloomy in ways that nobody in Canada was really willing to deal with at that time at all. As a writer, I'm a skier. I have to go right to the top of the hill and get up some momentum and just go as fast as I can all the way down to the bottom. If I fall part way down, I have to go back up to the top.
You have plenty of lift tickets?
I don't have any. I was taught to go uphill on skis this way, you know?
I
go
see.
like that.
So it takes you quite a while
It
to
takes
climb.
me a long time to get back
climb
up
to
to
the-
the top of that hill.
So things are looking up.
Barometer's rising. It's fair.
What was my problem deep down? I was admitting to myself at last that I didn't really like her novels that much. Sure, they were very well plotted, they were funny, but they were cold. The characters were cold. They weren't likable. They seemed to be like victims all the time. I couldn't identify with them. Why hadn't I discovered this before? Well, I guess I was absolutely overwhelmed by her popularity, and I thought, I can't be right. Parents seem to me the big losers in her novels. They are very remote, they seem to be unloving, they're not coping, and I wondered why this is. But it was hard to ask those questions, especially when Margaret herself was being very maternal almost, bringing us pies from the kitchen up on the hill.
This is my father's section of the house. In my mother's, things are arranged on hooks and shelves in inviolable order. Cups, pots, plates, pans. This is not because my mother makes a fetish of housekeeping, but because she doesn't want to waste time on it. All her favorite recipes begin with the word quick. Less is more as far as she is concerned, and this means everything in its place. She has never been interested, luckily, in the house beautiful, but she does insist on the house convenient.
What I'd like you to do, if you want to, is go through all of her novels and look what she has to say about parents.
You do it, Mike.
Theodore Reich?
Theodore Reich. You see what it's called? Love and Lust?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of yours there.
Yes,
Everything.
I noticed that.
Everything.
Well, I showed Marilee an article that said that, in fact, I have no view of life. So if you believe him, you're going to have to stop right here.
I don't believe you. I think you have a very strong view of life because I see a lot of victims in your books. What I think is victims, and I can tell you
if I
why.
hadn't written that book of criticism, nobody ever would have seen any of those things.
I reckon I would have.
Well, maybe.
There's a sense of people who are like puppets, that there are others pulling the strings, or let's say society is pulling the strings.
Which novel are you thinking of in
All
particular?
of them, pretty much.
Well, you see, I don't happen to agree with you about that.
Here's a thing to think about if you are attracted to this personal style. You have a personal relationship with your talent, and it's hard to be critical because there's that personal thing there. Physically, the shoot was quite hard. We were living in tents. All our food was cooked on the fire. The rain kept on, and Andy, the sound man, had to work miracles that it didn't obscure the dialogue. Andreas Poulsen, my cameraman, was great. He was forever foraging around, looking for strange shots, finding Margaret doing ecological things, for instance, or out in the canoe, communing with nature. I owe a lot of what this film is to him.
So you've read the bits about families?
Yeah.
And?
And I think that she when she's writing about modern urban bourgeois society, most families are fragmented, like those she writes about.
It's so consistent, the hostility with which mothers are treated and fathers are treated, especially fathers who are either not there or completely ineffectual, that I think it must mean something a little bit more than that.
Looking back on the film, it's very curious that during 5 days I've always, it seems, got the same shirt on. How is that possible? I suspected what actually happened was I must have bought lots of green shirts and thereby was able to have always the same look for continuity purposes. Anyway, it was time to go up to the castle on the hill and find out what the parenting was like up there. To my surprise, I found it was warm. Everything was warm.
Both my pistols went off, and both escaped out of my hands. He let go of them, because he was surprised by them going off, too. They did not fall alone. With a choked cry, Israel Hands loosed his grasp upon the shrouds and plunged headfirst into the water.
How come?
He shot him by mistake.
Who did?
Jim Hawkins shot Israel Hands by mistake.
Our captain stood on the quarter deck, and a fine little man was he.
That's her partner, Graham, Jess's father.
Overhaul, let your devil
And what a great voice.
and lower your boats to sea, brave boys. And
When Peggy was growing up, did you see any signs that she was going to do what she's done?
Well, no, I didn't, except that she started writing as soon as she could print
Yeah.
with phonetic spelling.
What sort of things did she write when she was a kid?
She wrote a play, and you want to hear what I thought was the best line in the whole thing?
Yes.
Well, one character says, "And if I am telling a lie, may the moon fall down on me." And the next line is, "Crash."
No explanation, just crash.
Yeah.
I think it was her dad who gave me the feeling that I had a perfect right to be bothered by this portrayal of parents. He talked about fairness. And it seemed to me that what was happening in terms of parents in her novels was very unfair, considering the way she'd been brought up.
What's your expression? Fair go mate?
Fair go, mate.
Fair go mate. I think that's an Australian expression sums up our attitude pretty well.
Yeah.
That we always felt they should be treated fairly and that they should feel that they were being treated fairly.
Mm-hmm. And avoiding inculcating guilt feelings?
Yes, that's very true. Often things were decided by drawing straws. If there was a question who was going to go first and who was going to go in which canoe and time, draw straws for it. And they accepted that idea.
But to be fair myself, of course, I had to check this line of thought with her, which was a little bit uncomfortable, but not too bad.
I think something that shocked me when I was younger was going out into the world and realizing that very few parents were as benevolent towards their children as mine were, and it still does shock me to hear these stories of what parents have done to their children. So that's much more the right reason why I put those kinds of figures into my books. It's not because my own parents are like that, it's because my own parents aren't like that.
That was the puzzle to me, that somebody who'd been so well looked after should then turn around and go zap society and produce all of these monstrous people.
See, we would have to be more specific about the books. And when you go through them, well, there's Life Before Man, in which the parents are write-offs. I mean, they're pretty much gone. And the bad parent figure is an aunt.
But let's set it up. Okay, her parents are dismissed in a page.
The ones in Surfacing are benevolent but dead.
Yes, but we're not. You couldn't talk to them though because
the ones in Lady Oracle are definitely unsatisfactory. They the mother is quite mean, and unhappy and dissatisfied, and the father is just a non-participant. He doesn't really. He kind of absents himself.
And in Bodily Harm?
Bodily Harm, the parents are untouching. Right. It's that curious southern Ontario and probably, possibly trans-Canadian habit of just not touching other people a lot.
But you can see how one could be puzzled. I mean, it adds up to a bleak cast of characters.
Well,
no?
Look at the statistics, Michael.
Now, all these years later, I realized what was really bothering me. That in all these novels of hers, with all the bleak parents, she never found a place to celebrate women who had moved outside the family but kept the mothering, nurturing thing into everyday life. I mean, there are so many women, of course, who are primary school teachers, who are nurses, who are doctors, who are psychologists. All of these people are bringing that nurturing thing out into everyday life in a way that we absolutely need. And I really feel shortchanged now that none of them are allowed on the pages. It just doesn't seem right to me. And of course her mother exemplified this. This is a woman who was a primary school teacher. She gave up that to homeschool her kids in the wilderness and doesn't in any way seem to be somebody who was shortchanged or frustrated by life. Not at all.
You were telling me when you were bringing the kids up how you tried to give them all that encouragement.
Yes, I can remember the first time Peggy made applesauce. I had to leave the kitchen. I couldn't bear to see the apples being destroyed.
But you didn't tell her she was doing it the wrong way.
Oh, heavens no. Don't do that sort of thing. She'd never make it again.
Right.
If you did that.
I mean, what a wonderful ethos. What a wonderful way to see life. Let's have stories about people like that. Of course, she could say, well, if you don't like the food, go to another restaurant. I mean, if you ask any friend about their growing up, those who tell you that they had a nurturing, loving mother are so happy that they did. And those that didn't have such a person, had a mother who was distracted, who was, whose career was more important, they obviously feel that they were left out. So this question of the maternal mothering thing in society has to be incredibly important.
Anyway, have a wonderful rest for the rest of your vacation. And we'll see you possibly.
Speaking technically, I did something which has possibly never been done before, and you can judge whether it was a good move or not. I basically gave up control of the film. We taught them how to use our big cumbersome camera, and we gave it to them to overnight make their own movie.
Who is this woman?
That's the topic.
With me promising that whatever they shot, it would go into the film uncut, as it did.
Well, that woman is my daughter, and she's incognito.
This woman is the head of the Ku Klux Klan, masquerading as Margaret Atwood.
Okay, Michael Rubo's whole problem is that he thinks of me as mysterious and a problem to be solved, right? And for that reason, he spent a lot of the time, so far, trying to get the clue, trying to solve this problem. He's trying to find out why some of my work is somber in tone, shall we say.
I'm surprised when literature isn't somber in tone.
Yes, there you are. But does your surprise come because somebody dropped you on your head when you were 3? Or because that's what you see when you look around?
I guess when I saw the material, I was disappointed that she had misreported my worries. I was not thinking that she'd had some childhood trauma. I was just wondering where all this dark stuff came from. What was that agenda? Then things settled down, and one day we went painting on this remote, rocky outcrop. She had actually thought of being a painter, maybe before becoming a writer, actually. Anyway, she's doing this very controlled watercolor, and I'm trying to do her and making a complete mess of it. But some very interesting things came out of that conversation, and I had the nice feeling that actually at last we were being useful, that she was treating me as a sort of sounding board.
I mean, that quality that you're finding about the families not getting on together isn't in the poetry, for instance.
Yes,
Isn't
but nor are families in the poetry
Right.
that much.
In a novel, I'm interested in seeing characters put in positions in which they have to make choices. Those clear-cut, dramatic situations. Shall I save myself or shall I run back into the burning building and try to rescue old Miss Jones? That kind of thing. You don't often have those kinds of choices in an ordinary person's life. So what you're telling me really is maybe I shouldn't write about ordinary people. Maybe I should write about extraordinary people.
What do you say to that?
I don't know. I don't really feel that it's up to you to tell me what I should be writing about.
I didn't say it, you said it. You posed the question.
Merrily also, towards the end of the shooting, got used as a sounding board. There they were in this tent, silhouetted, me outside, eavesdropping, and I'm finding that I'm getting off the hook to some extent, which felt good. When somebody is really, really freaked out by me in the evil stepmother direction, it's usually a man. I think people in general, men as well as women, expect more from women artists in the area of their behavior. In other words, we still want them to be good mothers, whether they're mothers or not. We still want them to be seen as kindly and benevolent, because the idea of an evil mother, or let's put it another way, a woman who is not soft and feminine, is frightening to both sexes. That's our mother. It might be our mother.
Do you think that's part of the difficulty that Mike's having with you in terms of this mystery he's trying to find?
In honesty, no.
What do you?
I don't feel that Michael is freaked out in that particular way. I don't think he thinks I'm an evil person. I don't think he finds me threatening or vampiristic or Medusa-like or any of those things. I think he wants to know what drives me on, what makes me do the work. The easy answer to that is that I write because I'm a writer. Sometimes, on some days, I sit and I look at what I'm writing and I think, how can I be writing this? This is dreadful. It's appalling. I don't mean bad stylistically, but it's horrifying. And sure, I have the same questions that Michael has. Where does it come from? Well, for me, it comes from what I'm looking at. The point is, I suppose, why I'm looking at that, but these days I don't see how you can avoid it.
As you can imagine, I've lately searched my movie to see if there were any clues about what was coming next. Because, believe it or not, the next published novel would be The Handmaid's Tale, published in 1985. One clue that I did find, although it's a sort of upside down one in a way, is that we were talking about a coup which had just happened, a military coup in Argentina, and whether or not this would be something that she could write about.
But that doesn't happen to be our war. You know, it doesn't happen to be a Canadian war. You could not, as a Canadian, write about that situation except as an observer. Canada is not historically in that kind of situation. You know, many consider that lucky. I do. Why wish upon yourself a terrible civil war that kills off thousands of people?
In order to find your identity.
In order to give you a good story as a writer. I mean, that would be totally selfish and disgusting as well.
Now, isn't that fascinating that she did write about a coup, but not one way down in Latin America, but just south of the border in the US? I still don't understand why Margaret loves the grim and gloomy. I can't believe that it's because it sells. I don't see her that way. I've tried to make contact over the years, but I haven't succeeded. I did hear indirectly that she loved the stuff with her parents, which was nice.
7 of them.
So Michael Rubo's problem, actually, is that he's trying to remake this film that he made 35 years ago, but with better arguments than he was able to muster back then. So that's true. That is true. Yes, I admit it. That is absolutely true. Anyway, that's life. Maybe a good lesson for you. Be careful. When you engage with a very famous person, make sure you're up to it.